Hello, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. Here on the cast, we discuss everything emotions through the lens of attachment, the nervous system, and internal parts work. We're a little irreverent and like to have fun exploring the emotional issues and dynamics that interest us. So come along and hang out. Let's explore the fascinating lands of emotions.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. I'm your host, Angela Wetzel. I'm with Epic Initiator Coaching. We also have your other host, Nick Carl, who is a somatic experiencer, good friend, cool dude all around. And today we're going to be talking about masculine and feminine energy dynamics. So if you've never really thought or heard of this topic, I think it's becoming more and more popular. But basically, this is the yin and yang energy. This is describing polarity, not just gender or sex, but these types of energies and how they work together. But I think most importantly, how they interact in our relationships. And even more interesting to me is how they operate inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'll let you take it away.
Well, I was talking to my brother, Father Greg, about this the other day, and he's kind of familiar with the landscape of parts work, okay?
Yeah.
And in the landscape of parts works, these are maps, right? Maps. This is not the actual landscape. And maps are good for us because they are like a form of abstraction. They're a way for us to make sense of some of the landscape and how to get around in it, around it, and through it, and how to work with it, right? Once we
can start, the parts work?
Yeah, but also the idea of masculine and feminine.
Oh, yeah.
Because it kind of ends up being like a holographic thing, depending on the level that you're working on, and you start to zoom in on things, it starts to break down, right? And so that I do think it is a genuine dynamic of the universe.
Well, okay. So I know what you're saying, but I'm going to ask you to go back and try to say that in layman's terms, just for some people that are newer to the emotional journey and the emotional work.
Okay.
Because there might be a better way.
Well, okay. So the idea of parts work, right? The idea of parts work is that inside of yourself, you can have certain, and it all happens in moments, but you'll have like an emotion or a thought, and they consist of a certain amount of a certain energy of a certain flavor, right? And we start to think about those things as individual consciousnesses, almost as individual people, which allows you to start working with these, it's like a cast of characters seated at a round table, and each of these characters are versions or visions of yourself, right? So that's this idea of, and so that's the map that we work with. Now, when I talk about like the holographic part of it, it's so let's say you're looking at a map and you're zoomed out to, you're seeing 10 miles, right? You can start, if you're at this particular view, you can use these ideas like thinking about masculine and feminine dynamics inside of yourself, really in lots of different places in reality, right? But if you take the same thing and you start to zoom very close into it and take apart the constituent parts and think about it in great detail, sometimes these distinctions of masculine and feminine or black and white start to break down. They don't work. So it's at certain levels of zoom, okay?
So we were talking about the other day about how they at some point become inextricable from each other.
Right.
And but when you're zoomed out, you can kind of categorize them into two categories of how to describe that energy.
At certain levels it works. But this is represented fantastically in the classic yin yang, right? The classic yin yang is, a folded thing with black and white, but in the center of each one is a black dot and a white dot. So it's this little bit, So me, I am a masculine, identified. That's an important distinction. We're not talking about, sexual expression or gender, not at all. Right. It's my own personal energy. I identify deep in my core as, in this carnation of life, as masculine, right? Mm-hmm. And so the essence of masculinity is pure consciousness, right? It's the ground of everything. Pure consciousness actually is nothingness. There's nothingness. It's just, it happens to be this like substrate of consciousness. It's like there is something there. There's like a watcher or a listener or just like a being, but it's empty, it's open, and it's sensitive to what's happening in its field. Okay, that's
Right.
pure consciousness.
Observing everything.
Okay, as opposed to the opposite of that. And the opposite of that is a happening, is a flowing. So like they talk
That's
about
me.
like,
I'm happening and flowing.
and like it's energy, right? So this is where we come up with the terms like Mother Earth. Like Mother Earth, the Earth is happening, it's moving. There's all sorts of constituent, physical, natural things happening on the Earth, right?
Weather,
like weather and like volcanic
cycles,
shifting and like space rays, and like there's all this natural physical stuff that is happening. And but they exist with each other and inside of each other, right?
Yeah, like space, the void, the vast universe,
Right.
holding Mother Earth, which is then nurturing all the constituents like of the planet.
Right. And so in relationships, right? And this goes for all relationship. It doesn't matter if it's like a heterosexual or homosexual relationships. There are always these dynamics, because one of the basic things that is a property of masculine and feminine is that between them, when you get a really masculine identified person along with a feminine identified person, there happens to be this polarity. It generates energy in between them, and so
there's tension.
There's tension, which it forms. That's like the energetic basis for attraction, right?
Yeah.
Right.
It's like complementary, but also like kind of like the idea of polarity. It's like one pole, it's the same pole, but opposite ends of the pole.
Right.
And that distance creates that tension between them. There's like there's an attraction there,
right,
or a sense of magnetism.
Right.
And they're drawn to each other because they're equal / complementary, but opposites.
So one of the OGs that talked a lot about these particular types of dynamics is David Data, right? And he would usually talk about it in relational terms, right? So it's like relational terms, but also evolutionary terms, right? He had this like 3-step model of like, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And in stage 1, so I guess it doesn't matter if you're a masculine identified person or a feminine identified person, but if you're in a stage 1 moment, it's only about yourself, okay? So like I, stage 1, have to pee right now and nothing else really matters in the world. I gotta pee, and that's just like, so everybody has stage 1's moments, but you can kind of imagine somebody who's like maybe narcissistic or just isn't connected, can't do relational things.
Well, or it seems like from that example, like maybe someone who's really needing something, or is like in a triggered state or victimized state, or even just like you said, like I really have to have food right now, I'm gonna pass out. Like that's very me centered.
Okay, and then the second stage was a very sort of reciprocal, but just kind of very middling, which is like, I'm okay. Are you okay? Just kind of very like I'll stay in my box and you stay in your box, and I respect your box as long as you respect my box, and like you're happy and if I'm happy, and it's very just like sort of diplomatic, right? Okay, but not very creative, I don't think, because maybe just a little bit too scared or something, And then he talked about sort of the third.
So is it kind of like the person like that you see and they're like, how are you doing? But they actually don't want to know how you're doing. They're just like interacting. Like it's kind of rhetorical. Is that what you mean by it? Or
yeah, possibly. But I kind of think about in relational stuff too, like in being in an intimate relationship with somebody, it's like, I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want you to hurt my feelings. I don't really trust you all the way, and I don't.
So it's like very polite, kind of.
It's like very polite, kind of, but also like it's restrained, and not very trusting in like the depths. Okay.
Okay. So there's
Okay,
trust issues in this relationship.
right. And then you could go to the fullest, highest expression of these things, right? So in the highest expression, it's he would call it sort of third stage. That's when you start to trust in like the deep wisdom that is embedded in your own identification with your sexual polarity, right? And so there are certain.
Whoa, wait, explain that what you just said, because I might, my brain went, what?
Okay, so as a masculine identified character, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna talk about. We're talking about like king energy, right? It's where
Mm-hmm.
like I walk into the room and everybody feels my energy, feels how like nailed to the center, the core of the earth I am, like in my being, in my balls, right?
Oh, right.
About like how sort of like kingly and like a stately, like that that you can receive everybody, like you make everybody in the room feel important. You make your partner feel important, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like you are the ground, right? You are the ground that holds everybody. It's like your direction when you say like this is what we have to do, like it just makes sense. It's like, obviously like
Right. And we'll get to the whole like why you said balls thing, because probably some people are like, is Nick just saying balls because it's fun to say balls?
yeah,
Probably partially, but there's a reason
balls,
this
balls.
balls.
Okay. So that's it's this big king energy, and there's lots of dynamics of what like this. We'll just say perfect full expression of what masculine energy is, right? And so this is generative, fatherly, king, helping, but also very firm energy, right? In the midst of sort of the like the third stage feminine energy, and the third stage feminine energy is like a feminine identified character, and it can be any sex. It doesn't have to be,
Right. Just
who
someone who's
lets their fullness of their heart like really flow out and become in this space, right?
Mhm.
And the thing is that like in this dance, it kind of takes. It doesn't take because this gets a little weird and meta because everybody has both inside them
Right.
too. But you can see that if two people polarize to each other, sort of like in this highest expression of themselves, then can move so much energy that the container and the consciousness lends to like the safety and the protection and like also the awe of all of the feminine love and energy that can be moved by like a feminine identified person, right?
Mm. Well, when I think about these things, what I think about is the kind of fluidity of these masculine and feminine energies like within us, because you know I'm a feminine energy identified being. Like I feel like I look feminine, but I also like identify with being more feminine. But of course I have like some masculine energy attributes or ways that
Sure.
I feel like I get along with men really well because I like video games and crude language and things like that, but also like more like maybe my style of thinking can be a little bit more masculine in some ways.
Right.
But also like women, when we're like in our jobs and like our careers and our passion purpose, like we can be very like direct focus, because masculine energy is usually single focus. It's very directive. It's like the shortest point between A and B. It's reserving resources, and it's like this very straightforward energy. Like it's like
Right.
this. And feminine energy can actually be naturally very diffuse. Like Alison Armstrong talks about this too. Like, there's a lot of people that really talk about masculine and feminine stuff, like John Gray. Men are from Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but she talks about feminine energy being diffuse and being like that kind of focus. And reasons why the there's a reason why those energies are that way, like not just like for survival. Like women looking out for children need to be aware of so many different things at the same time. And men, they're used to engage in like hunting and like, you know, winning at things like providing. It's a lot more like direct, like I need to go do this thing kind of. But I was going to say, so it's like when you're in a relationship, it's being able to have those two dynamics flow, because it's not like you're going to have a partner that is always in his masculine dominant and you're always in your feminine dominant. I think based on what the natural flow between you, like that's going to change from like maybe minute to minute, hour to hour, but you'll probably have like a certain overall like common dynamic. But well, then there's a whole wounded dynamic thing that we'll get into.
Sure. And I want to ask you about that. But
Yeah.
one of the things that he kind of talks about, which I liked, is that what can start to happen in like deep trust between polarized couples is that you can start to, in the other person, trust the thing that they're mostly identified with, you know? So it's like if you're my partner and like you walk into a room and say like, no, the vibe of this room, the feeling, like the way it's decorated or something is, you know, and because you swim in those waters all day long, right? That it's like your sense of how that's actually working is going to be so much more nuanced and so much more detailed that like you can start to trust that and take that in as like something to go off of, you know. And those deep parts, when trust starts to get like actually established, you know, it's like, right. I trust you to like be the man that I know that you are, and like I trust you to reflect back to me the actual heart and the energy of whatever situation that it is, you know, to actually trust your feminine heart and what it's actually expressing as a bellwether for the energy that's happening, you know.
I do have a question for you, and this is, I'm just curious what your opinion is, but
right.
So when I work with clients, like sometimes we'll talk about their own inner feminine or their own inner masculine energy.
Sure.
And like how those two relate to each other. So each, you know, as a woman, like it's important that if I'm like externally, let's say I'm wanting to attract someone that has king energy, then it's like I have to show up with like queen energy. But that also means that I would cultivate my own inner king. Right?
Yeah.
But what I see a lot of times, especially with people that are parentified or have trauma, is that they'll have their queen and they'll look for a king, but their own inner king is out like on loan to other people.
Yeah.
Or their own like, oh, well, it's not necessarily a king, but it's like right. That masculine energy is like on loan to other people, or is like fighting off people that would come towards them. So it's like then we're getting into the wounded space, but it's like in order to attract like your complementary person or energetic partner, it's like you want to make sure that your own energetic house is in order first, or your own energetic kingdom is in order first, so that you're actually because your own inner feminine is being so supported by your inner masculine, that you're actually able to be a balanced energetic counterpart to someone else who's healthy. But this was my question. So you're talking about two people and them starting to develop this kind of like energetic trust. So then it's like, in my mind, automatically, I'm going to, how do you sustain like healthy interdependence in a state like that? When I think of each person kind of being in their own like energy and trusting like their source. Right. As like first and foremost.
Yeah, no,
you know what I'm saying? What I'm
asking? It does, and I think this is like a perfect example where the tool starts to break down. Okay, because the thing I'm presupposing, right, which is a big presupposition, is this idea of being like a healthy whole, a healthy individual, right?
Right. Because but also, there was something about what you said that I liked what you said. just about this like idea of partnership and like this trust and like trusting another person.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe because like obviously we're not always going to be fully connected to like this higher
Yeah,
self, right?
like you're
So it's
not
kind of
like every moment. Like how many moments are there in a day? Thousands, right? And
right.
it's
So
like if
then
you're whatever stage you're going to be in from moment to moment, like you could be in very like stage one moments or stage two moments. When whatever you said reminded me shit that like my mom did, which is like bringing up this stuff. Which now we're all into this like wounded energy, and so like my own internal kingdom is now like way out of balance, and then trying to connect through that can be really problematic. It can be really tricky.
I like have all this stuff that's like popping up in my head, but I'm thinking about all these different conversations I've had with like clients or even dynamics I've seen in relationships where you'll have like the feminine energy partner who's like very intuitive and like knows like this is a good deal, this isn't necessarily a good deal, or like this is kind of the direction
Sure.
we should go in with this because she's feeling into something.
Right.
And then having like the masculine energy partner like not trust her or not listen
Yeah.
to her, but instead is like kind of in his head and trying to go
Yeah.
this like logical route. But that
Right.
logical route is like kind of based on some of his own limited perspective or thinking.
Sure.
And then it's like there's a breakdown in the system, but it also represents each person's internal breakdown of what's happening within their own dynamics,
Right.
right?
Yes.
It's just expressed in the external partnership. So
Right.
maybe kind of what you're saying is like perhaps in partnership, like nobody's perfect or ever going to be perfect at all times, but there's this sense of there being like a partnership or complement, like complimenting someone like in their weaker moment. Like if you're regulated and they're not,
Mm-hmm.
it's like kind of being able to take over. Or if this person has like expertise here, then kind of letting this person lead. So like kind of finding those
Well, and I think
strengths
about
or
think about the moments too, right? So let's just say like right now we're in a creative moment, right? We're both regulated. We're both like kind of imagining and thinking and kind of like shooting from the hip, right?
mm-hmm.
So this is third-ish stage, right? So like if you had like a notion about something, I would probably be like, yeah, okay, yeah, Angela's got some good ideas about this. I know she has got great feelers, and so I could probably
Mm-hmm.
trust that to mean something. But if you were like coming at me, and then I'm sort of collapsed into something, then like the game has changed. Then now we're fighting like maybe on two battles, or on two
I'd be
fronts.
like, Nick, I need to see all your references.
Yeah, and I'd be like, like oh god, and then I'm referencing my Rolodex of like all of my insecure problems. So this reminds me a little bit of kind of the conversation I was having with my brother. So we were talking about internal parts work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about my own and reading a little bit about my own. There's an idea of, so I talked about it in a didactic, male, female, or masculine, feminine, two-person sort of game, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
tool also works inside of your own kingdom, right? Inside of your own parts. And so, like, I thought about this, and it's not perfect, but the way I was sort of like starting to work with it is that I have plenty of fears that come up as I, roll through my days and roll through my moments, right? Like it happens kind of a lot, like little mini flashbacks. I mean, that's kind of what it feels like. So I had this thing at work and I got like kind of really scared. It was like, it's like, like, oh God, I don't want that to happen. Don't want that to happen. And the way I used the tool was to think that like that type of feeling, of the fear, as a feminine aspect of my own being, right? Here's like this
Mm-hmm.
emotion that comes up from the bottom. And then what I met it with to sort of balance it and to take care of it was the masculine part of me, which I just use as my kind of like adult consciousness, right? And so I, put my
Mm-hmm.
hand on my chest and be like, it's a, it makes a lot of sense that you would feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because that would be scary to if somebody came after you like that or singled you out, that would be scary. But, probably not going to happen, okay? But even if it did happen, that I'd be here with you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this part of me, And I know that you can feel it inside, fear inside. This part of me is 42 years old, has been around the block. I can handle myself. We can get through whatever comes, you know?
Mhm.
And I could kind of feel by like meeting that thing, I can kind of feel my sort of internal emotional blood pressure kind of be like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And so there's like that meeting inside, which is like a nice balance of sort of like a masculine and I think a feminine kind of
Mhm.
part coming together, you know?
Right. I'm so glad you brought that up because, our podcast is about the emotional journey, and I wanted us to talk about like how to apply this in working with emotions and interacting with that. And that was a really good example. So,
Now, it's because I've thought about, because I know that's one thing that I crave. When like, I think that I'm like love starved, right? Like, for like, I think that I have a little bit tougher of a time embracing myself in deep, like feminine energy, right? Like, cause I have some friends, like one of my good friends, Andrea, like whenever she sees me, she just like beams love to me. And like part of like one little part of my like is just like, oh, oh. And I don't know how well to do it well to like give myself that kind of like adoration, of like a really like like a mother's golden love and just like beaming smile. Like that's a little bit tougher to give to myself.
I feel like it's more of like a letting in, because to me it's like if we're not able to let that in, it tells me there's probably like layers, like wounded parts kind of in there, sort of
Sure.
blocking it for whatever reason. But I mean, I'll tell some stories that are very interesting, but
I, Before we go there, I just want to talk about just in
okay.
general some of the basic senses, right, of what healthy masculine energy is and unhealthy feminine energy, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so we talked about like masculine energy is a lot about like lines. It's like drawing lines and boxes and thinking about like A to B, right?
Yeah.
It was like I remember like one I liked is like the ocean is feminine energy, and then the boat getting from shore to shore is masculine energy.
And also like the ocean basin and the shore can be masculine energy, like that
Right.
holding it all.
Like the masculine story is two men took a road trip across the country and nothing was said and they both had a wonderful time. It's like
Right.
men get together and they fight each other. It's life and death type of shit. It's like, I got to count on you, soldier. It's life and death. It's like, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. That type of shit. Like football, right? Like football is just like two teams pushing against each other. Men love that shit, right? It's just like,
Right.
here's the line, and we're gonna push
Mm.
on each other. So it's about like drawing lines. It's about like life and death. You can imagine like the decorating of a man. It's like stark. Empty shelves. It's like maybe wood grain would be as fancy as you would ever get. But it's like we have
Right.
grays and we have blacks.
Right. Well, that would be depending on like his energetic makeup, like how much masculine, how much
Sure,
feminine
I'm
he
like
has, and also
I'm puffing it up just to give the essence of what the energy
right.
is, right?
Right. Like if we're talking about like healthy masculine energy, I would say there's like, there's the archetypes books, like Robert Moore's book, King, Magician, Warrior, Lover,
Hmm.
right? Which is really good. And then on the feminine side, it's Women Who Run with Wolves.
Right.
So those are both like archetype books, which are really fascinating. There's a lot of material on this, but basically, like I view healthy masculine energy as providing structure and accountability
Mm.
and like observation and witnessing, but it's flexible, it's supportive,
Hmm.
and it's like well boundaried in a healthy boundaried way. It's not too soft and it's not too rigid.
Right.
So it's kind of like when you think about having internal boundaries, it's like discernment in a way. So it's like if you're always rolling out of bed at noon and that's not serving you, it's like you could use some healthy masculine energy to provide structure and direction and accountability
Mm.
to, like, move it, like to figure out what's going on. Like, hey, what's going on? This is why, finding out the emotional reason why you're not getting out of bed, and then
And I
applying some.
and one of the key things for the internal stuff is a masculine voice that is not shaming, right?
Right, yeah, that would fall into the unhealthy category. So it's like encouraging, um it's like firm but
Right.
loving, still
Right.
compassionate.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of, like, I have certain metaphors that I like to think of, like the wine bottle is providing structure and the wine within it is like the
Mm-hmm.
feminine, so the
Sure.
masculine and feminine.
Okay.
And then what was the other example? Yeah, usually the ocean and the ocean basin. Because,
Mm-hmm.
like, if you think about it, this tiny little ship being at the mercy, like, of the ocean could feel like may not actually be masculine energy as much.
Mm.
Like, it might actually be wounded feminine
Right.
masquerading as masculine
Okay,
energy.
so that's some masculine traits. What's something for the feminine traits?
Like healthy feminine,
Yeah.
I would say, um, like satisfaction, appreciation, joy,
Mm.
but also, like, I think there's a natural, like, flow and generosity to, like, healthy feminine, like it's life-giving,
Nurturing.
nurturing, sure. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's like some of these areas, it's like that's where we start to overlap, because it's like
Sure.
masculine energy can be very generous too. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
it's kind of like combining
Right.
these things. But, like, I view healthy feminine as being receptive, as being open, as like
Mm-hmm.
being something that can actually, like, move and express instead of being stationary. So I
Right.
view it as being like cyclical, or like weather. It's not wrong. It's just changing state. It's like a
Right.
state of change. It's a state of expression. It's it's like juice, it's like something, it's juicy, it's um fun, it's like, and there's like a lot of feminine aspects, like details and uh like, I don't know, when I think about feminine stuff, I just think about the state of being. It's really being. And when I think about masculine energy, I almost think in some ways, like, I do attribute it more with like doing, but it's not necessarily by force or pressure, but like a continual expansion, like just how the universe, like, continually expands,
Mm.
and how consciousness expands. It's like the nature of that motion is always forward in expansion.
Mm. Okay, and so the wounded aspects, when we're, it's like wounded energy. It's like, okay, what is a wound, right?
Yeah, probably anything that feels like powerless, or that's in the fear category, or feeling victimized.
Right. No, it's what's the lady's name? Lee. Sorry, we're gonna have her on our
Lynn
podcast.
Forrest.
Yeah, Lynn Forrest. So she uses this like kind of like two triangle model, and on the bottom of the triangle, which would we'd say just the bottom side of the,
Yeah, the
we
upside
just
down triangle.
yeah, well, we just talked about the empowered, right, or filled with good energy aspects
Oh,
of
right, right.
masculine
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
feminine, right?
yeah.
So that's one side of the coin. There's like a polarity here, like in a different
Mhm.
dimension. But then there's sort of like the bottom side of the coin, or sort of like when you're in a wounded place or a victimized place, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like the
Eh,
shadow aspects, like the right side up triangle above. And, like, if you look at some of the healed archetypes, like, I even think Robert Moore probably has something in his books where it's different faces, like, of the pyramid. And
mm,
then you have like your reflected shadow aspects, which is
right.
also like an upside down pyramid or triangle.
Okay.
So it's like when you think about the, like, corrupt aspects of the healthy masculine. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like critical,
Mm-hmm.
forcing, pressuring,
Yeah, dominating,
hustling,
right,
dominating,
manipulating,
bullying.
right.
it's like harsher, forceful. It can be,
Unfeeling.
yeah, completely like empty of like any connection. So it's not attuned.
Right.
It's yeah, so it can like be somewhat cold, like very rigid,
Yeah.
things like that.
Okay. And the
I'm trying to,
feminine?
there's like a lot of different
Is the feminine
dynamics.
similar then? Or what's
Well, the feminine, like I would say, like the feminine that's not in check would be more like maybe wishy-washy, like not really knowing what she desires, feeling stagnant or
right?
stuck
Yeah.
or helpless, powerless, like waiting, like that damsel in distress, feeling like she's waiting for something, waiting in
Sure.
the tower. Um, maybe more like just depressed state can be, like that kind of
Yeah.
unhealthy.
I think about like the opposite of like flowing energy because like I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of feminine energy is like movement, you know? So it's like rigidity, right?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's probably room for overlap too, but what you might see is like a person that has a lot of like wounded masculine and they're out of touch with their feminine, or that has
Hmm.
like erected all these very stiff boundaries to protect all of this like vulnerability.
Right.
um and yeah, I think sometimes it's like hard to like separate these things, but there's certain like archetypes, like there's like the narcissist and the child, so it's kind of like to these wounded power dynamics like that go together, like there's the bully and the victim, the narcissist and the child, the hustler and the prostitute, the dictator and the flake. And so it's like masculine and then wounded masculine, wounded feminine counterparts.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then like the healed versions of those are like king, queen, like sorcerer, sorceress, like magician, like warrior, like those kind of archetypes. Those are
Mm-hmm.
like healthy, engaged with like higher purpose, like respecting other people's boundaries, like viewing everyone on an equal power plane. Like no one's better, no one's worse. Like
Right.
everyone
No
belongs and like
up,
has
down
a
stuff.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then like usually when it comes to wounded masculine and feminine, like we can unconsciously take part in these wounded dynamics without realizing it and blame
Sure.
the other person, but not really fully own our part in what's going on.
Yeah. That's what everybody's doing all the time, right?
Well, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Often.
In one of the books I was reading recently, he was talking about, so it's like the law of masculine and feminine. That is happening anywhere. But in terms of creation, that you always need both to like have creation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that in the example of the book, it was anything that has to deal with natural processes or nature is the feminine side of whatever's happening, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like the consciousness that comes in that sort of gives the guide rails for the natural process to happen inside of, you know? And so in the actual doing, it was the feminine
Mm-hmm.
principles that were actually doing a lot more of the actual making of a thing, you know? But it was utterly important to have the masculine structure around something so that the
Right.
natural process could flourish inside of.
Right. I mean, it's like, yeah, they go together and they move together, and like to have one without the other doesn't really make a lot of sense. And when you have people that are like out of balance with it,
Right.
then it's like, then you'll notice like their life is out of balance. Like a person that doesn't have a lot of structure in their life, they might have no organization in their home. They might
Mm-hmm.
have, things are dirty, like there's stacks and piles of things. Like that is an absence of like healthy masculine energy.
Right.
Right? If someone doesn't isn't able to schedule, isn't able to plan, isn't able to be accountable, there's a lack of like masculine energy. So there's likely more like wounded feminine energy. There's just, it's like, oh, I'm going to do what I feel like. I'm always just going to wait until I feel like I want to do it, which is like that, depending on what you have going on inside, like that's never going to happen, right?
Okay, so that's a wounded feminine energy?
I would say so.
Yeah, okay. All right, you're just like describing my whole life of like, just like
Right,
just
but
like
like, so those kind of things happen usually in reaction to the opposite energy, or just living in that same energy. So like if we never had healthy structure and had no one modeling like healthy systems, because when
right,
you think like when you have systems and structures in place that support your life, then it's like you know where to put things, you know what time you do this, you
right,
have forward momentum, and that structure supports your movement. So you're
right.
able to like have inspiration, like get up, brush your teeth, like do this at this time. So like if you don't have any of that energy, then you're going to be struggling really hard. Like you're not really going to be able to hold a job or have any accountability whatsoever.
Yeah.
Right. But it can happen from having that modeled where you never had anyone give you like healthy structured support, accountability, like any consistency, nothing like that. Or it can be that you came from such rigid harsh masculinity where it was so strict and there was lack of attunement and like just no space for really how you were feeling. It's all like you just
Right.
do this.
Then it's a
Then
rebellion and just
you can
it's
go
off
into
the.
rebellion and be like,
Well,
I'm
then
rejecting.
you don't trust the essence of what was sort of given because of the style it was given in. Like if a
Right.
tyrant, if you were sort of like raised by a tyrant or perceived as a tyrant,
Yeah.
then that structure will just be like, anathema. It'll just be like, oh, that's fucking gross. It reminds me of all
Right.
this bullshit. I won't
Yeah.
participate in that. But then that's going to kind of, hamstring you down the line, right?
Yeah. So, like, being around that dictator tyrant type can turn you into someone who's more wishy washy because your energy doesn't want to feel trapped by
Mm-hmm.
that or victimized by that
Right.
wounded energy. And so there can kind of be like a pushing away of anything that looks masculine. And that can either be like energetic or it could even be like gender specific masculine,
Sure.
where if you had a masculine perpetrator
Right.
in like any sense of the word, then like you may have a more difficult time trusting men or having those male relationships. And then also like depending on the situation, like growing up, like in the absence of masculine energy, like you could have a very masculine dominant mother, and then you could like that's what was emulated, and you can pick up like her responses to men and then wonder why like your relationships aren't working, because you have developed like an authentic masculine energy or way of approaching life where you're really not in your feminine.
Mm-hmm.
So I like jokingly call this like energy dick. It's like you don't realize, but you're showing up as like kind of energetically presenting as a dude, like that you want to compete, that you want to be in charge, that you want to plan,
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to be very like opinionated. You need to like be in control of things and try to direct and provide that structure and accountability. So there's a certain energy that comes with it.
Yeah.
So
Certain
like I'm
repulsive energy.
sure, right. So I'm sure you notice because you know like how your energy kind of wants to participate in relationship. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you've encountered women like that. And
Sure.
how does that feel? Like, do you find attraction or more repulsion there because you're like, oh, there's no space for me to be the man in this relationship, so I'm not
Yeah, I mean, I
interested.
can think about a specific person, and mostly it's not attractive. No, not attractive. But like
For
I
you,
yeah,
it
for me,
or
and
yeah.
how I identified. But inside of my own being, it's like some man could walk in the room and start telling me what to do, and I'm not going to listen to him either.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like, yeah, I get it. You can flap your gums all you want, but that doesn't like change anything about who I am. Like
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it just becomes It's just like, yeah, okay, or like, am I actually gonna have to deal with whatever the fuck you're talking about? You know?
Yeah. But there might be like a man, like, masculine container, and he might actually have more feminine energy. And if like that's who she authentically is and that's who he authentically is, they might have a really beautiful polarity there,
Sure.
which, you will see from time to time in relationships.
Right.
But it's not necessarily like I think as common as like some of the, more like stereotypical like pairings that you see. But
Right.
um
Does it go? I mean, I think I half know the answer to this question, but like, depending on the amount of sort of like shadow wounded shit that you show up with in a relationship, and then you start a relationship, and then it sort of goes. Is it? Does it go? Does your partner then like mirror a lot of that stuff, or that happens a lot, right?
so the rest of what I was going to say is what I've noticed is in certain situations, like if there hasn't been like a father present, there can be a child like that steps up. Let's say if it's a female and she steps up to like fill that energetic place,
Okay.
she's going to cultivate masculine energy, but it's not necessarily going to be authentic to who she really is. It's going to be part of a survival strategy.
Okay.
So it's like coming from a place of trauma or even like necessity for that home or survival.
Right.
So then when she's out of the context of that family and now like dating, she's going to have all this natural masculine energy, which may serve her very well when it comes to career and like getting ahead in certain ways, like whether it's like being competitive
Right.
in
Well, because
different.
it's like looking out for yourself and maintaining
Right.
safety and just
But when it comes to relationships, she might really struggle because she never had the sense of um
trust.
yeah, trust, like having that support, having
Right.
that like, firm groundedness that you were talking about that she
Yeah.
can
Some
like relax
rely on,
into.
relax into.
So
Yes.
like ideally we're taught both to be whole, complete humans. Like then I also coach men that don't really have a lot of access to their inner emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and so they struggle with different things in relationship. They can also struggle with finding receptive feminine energy partners
Mm-hmm.
because their own inner energy is so tumultuous.
Right.
They can have a life that's like somewhat devoid of joy or passion or different things, but it's all like kind of on a scale.
Sure.
But yeah, so like you could enter into a relationship that is like kind of off kilter or out of balance because of like the wounding that you have. And as you heal, it's going to naturally change your polarity, so it could change the
Mm-hmm.
attraction, kind of
Right.
change the dance that you're doing. And so it may cause this partner to either want to change with you or reject the changes that are happening. So
Right.
then there would be more like fighting and ruptures and like
Mm-hmm.
you like as you change, it means you would kind of outgrow this energetic dynamic and the polarity would no longer exist.
Right.
And then there's other things that can happen where people enter into relationships where they kind of show up in the dating world like being inauthentic, like trying to use strategy to like mask their own energy. So like they probably
Mm.
read a book about like
Right.
leaning back and
Yeah.
relaxing and whatever. So they try to take the actions to like manipulate their energy and use strategy as opposed to like getting to the underlying issue. So in some ways they're not really being themselves authentically. They're up
Right.
in their minds using strategy, which
Yeah.
is the
Which,
opposite of intimacy. So you might find themselves getting into a relationship, but they can't sustain the relationship because eventually
yeah, wherever you
they're
go, there you are.
wherever you go, there you are. So like their triggers are going to get tripped and
Right.
then they're going to enter back into their protective strategy or how
Yeah.
they've always done life. And they're going to
Yeah.
find themselves back in that pattern.
Yeah.
And then the polarity that existed is
Mm-hmm.
going to go. And so then the sex goes. But there's just a number of reasons why
Sure.
like that happens. And there's just a lot of
Yeah, so
dynamics there.
you can employ a strategy that mimics a certain sort of like state or energetic place, but it's just like unfortunately there's what 50,000 moments in a day and you just
Hard to
can't keep that
sustain it.
it's
Yeah,
you
hard to
can't keep the
sustain it.
beat.
So if you're not doing the inner deeper work to actually tend to your own energy, like to know how to
Right.
use your conscious mind, your observer mind to engage with your
Right.
emotions and do the self-soothing work and like achieve that inner intimacy and inner partnership with your
Inner
own masculine
trust.
and feminine
Right.
energy, your own inner trust, it's going to be very challenging for you to be in a healthy relationship dynamic with another person, but who you're going to attract is going to be um, showing you basically like
Mm-hmm.
through some kind of mirroring, and it's usually
Right.
not direct,
Yeah.
but who you attract into your life is going to show you what you have going on in your subconscious energies, because we attract both consciously and subconsciously. But I would say the majority of things that we attract are actually subconscious.
Absolutely.
And that can cause people to not want to take ownership for certain things that they're attracting, because
Well, yeah, because the
usually,
world happens to you, right?
right, well, if you're in the victim triangle, the world happens to you. But it's like if you want to exit that state of powerlessness, the only way to do that is really through like radical responsibility and saying, okay, I may not know what's going on inside, but I'm seeing this show up. How have I created this, or how have I participated
Right.
in this in some way,
And it's very
especially if it's
important
up,
to say, like, not in a dick kind of way, right?
right.
Not in a shameful, oh my God, how the fuck did I make this? It's like,
Right.
it's,
Yeah. So it's not in taking responsibility, it doesn't mean that you take the blame on. It doesn't mean you did something bad or you did something
right,
wrong. It just means that there's a part of your, inner being, your psyche, that is not fully conscious.
right,
So it's like you wouldn't go to a child that like, doesn't know how to, I don't know, like use the dishwasher or the washing machine at age 2 and be like, what's wrong with you? It's
right,
like, no, it just, when you don't have that modeling, if you've had a lot of complex trauma and things like that, you're going to have wounding, you're going to have stuff in your subconscious that you're just not fully aware of. And
right.
it's taking responsibility doesn't mean that you're wrong, it doesn't mean you're bad, it doesn't mean you're fucking
Yeah.
things up, it doesn't
No,
mean
it's
any
like,
of that. It's just it is a way for you to have a shot at getting your power back. It's like the only way to
right.
do it.
So it's like we learn how to be ourselves in our bodies at a very young age. And then we only, get these capabilities of sort of being able to assess things from a higher perspective later on in life. Here, okay, here you are. And
Mm-hmm.
then here you found yourself in a situation, say, less than optimal. It's not going to be like, why the fuck did this happen to me? God, this has happened again. It's
Yeah, or
too,
all people like this are trash, or
yeah,
all men can't be trusted,
right.
or these kind of blanket statements. It's like,
It's to use
if
your feelers. It's to use that, like, healthy adult masculine and the adult feminine to, like, love yourself, to have boundaries, just, and then ask the question, why is this here for me now? Right? There is
mm-hmm,
something here that I can actually use as a contrast to understand what I actually want here. Right?
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
um I was trying to think. Oh, um, you'd mentioned balls earlier. So do you want to talk about like why you said that, like being
My
grounded in your
balls.
balls? Like we were talking
Um,
about the kink, like in the room, and like being grounded and being.
So this is a Chris Bale thing. Chris Bale is on Instagram. He's pretty interesting, but he kind of talks about, and this is in kind of like sexual energy.
Mm,
There's I think that I do understand, which is, there's something about, like and I don't know how this works in the dynamic, but of being full of sexual energy, right?
mm,
And then it seems pretty popular to like the first move that we should do as men is to like get rid of it. It's like, let's let's get this done, right?
yeah.
Instead of being a container for it, right? So maybe like pure sexual energy, I would say it's probably feminine in its essence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so think about being the type of person who could just sit there in that energy and
And
like
hold it
and hold
and
it
not.
and like bask and actually like maybe even enjoy, right?
You know what? It's really fascinating that you said that because I don't think I've ever quite thought of it like that. And I think you're right. I like that.
So
But
in David Dataland, right? Okay. He
I was I want to go, well, I want you to say that, but the reason why I brought that up was because I thought you were going to talk about the poles, the masculine and feminine poles.
sure.
Okay.
In David Dataland, right? There's energy land, right, which is feminine, and then consciousness land, which is masculine,
Mm-hmm.
pure nothingness, right? Basking in absolute nothingness, which is like after guys come, that's where they go. It's like all of this like feminine, like swirling energy is now just gone. And it's just like, and that is bliss, one type of bliss, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
letting it all go. Like, for a long time, I imagined like I wanted everything to stop for a while. Like David Ada talks about the yoke of being alive to like the masculine identified person, like an oxen in a yoke and just like having to wake up and like, oh my God, all this shit is happening, and it's just like set down upon you, and you have to just carry it around and it's just like, oh God, it's perturbing, right? I want sweet serenity and nothingness.
Mm.
But in the balls, right? It's like in the balls are the sort of like the poles, the actual physical manifestation of the polarity, right? So
Right. So
whereas
the positive pole for men
the positive pole for men, like whereas the seat of consciousness,
being
it's
in
like
the root chakra
it's down in the
area.
root, right? So it's
Yeah,
like
the root.
it's um, so in the like the chakra system or the body system, it's like the root is like grounded down into the earth. This is as solid as we get, in terms of so that's all solidity, and then up through the channels, up through the chakras into our spiritual, which is like higher vibration. So like I don't necessarily think I don't know. This is a little weird thing. Like what is masculine energy tend to be? Does it tend to be like more solid? I think it does but it depends on the vibration. I don't know. But
Well,
but
so the positive pole being at the root and the negative pole being the
yes,
the
right.
heart area.
Of the human being, right? So where are our
Right. Oh
poles?
yeah,
So it's
the body centered,
right.
like those
So in the
poles.
masculine identified male, right? Because you can have a masculine identified female whose
Yes. And
pole,
vice
I guess,
versa.
would be just down at the bottom too. But anyway,
I
in
would
the
think so.
yeah,
Like, because I would think it wouldn't necessarily have to do with anatomy, but the energy body, right?
right, yes,
That would be my guess.
right.
Is that's less to do with anatomy than the
Yeah.
energy body.
Um, in this case, with a masculine identified male, it is sort of corresponding to a particular body part, which happens to be your balls. So like Chris Bale talks about for guys who want to like connect with their masculine energy and actually begin to like develop a relationship with it. Like we talk about having internal trust. Well, you can develop that too with your own masculine sense of whatever that energy is. And for him, it was like think about your penis like a 50 times a day. Like just get a sense of like its energy and where it exists
Like a grounding rod
like a grounding rod.
or
Okay, as opposed to the feminine. Uh, and this is a little bit weird too because the way he talked about because like obviously like uh the masculine pole, right, the physical pole of the penis, is like penetrative and the vagina is like receptive.
Mhm.
But he also talked about in the energy body is sort of like of the heart being the center for the feminine identified character, and then sort of like the breast like shining love out, like high beam love
Does
lights,
he really describe it that way? That's kind
Yeah,
of funny.
yeah. So of like, it's just like shining all your love and like appreciation and aliveness out through your breasts,
Which is kind of interesting, right? Because like, the rack is so glorified
Yeah.
in culture, right? It's just like I mean, it's kind of interesting when you think about it, but in some ways, I
Yeah,
feel
well,
like
so
I'm
he
a
would
little
say,
bit like, oh, really? I don't know.
when he would talk about just like energetic flow in men, it was sort of like it was receptive in the face and the head, and then like down through the body and then out, and then it was opposite in females. So it was like receptive below and then up and out,
Oh,
and then
like giving here,
yeah,
more
so it like
shining and
flowed this way,
giving,
whereas in men
receptive,
men
flow
flowed this
that
way.
way.
Yeah.
Right. Which is interesting because so the way that makes sense to me is like that saying, it's like the way to a man's heart is like through his stomach, but I really think the way to a man's heart is actually through his penis.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not to say that you win men over through sex. I
No.
think what it is that if you're able to recognize and respect that energetic pull, and I don't
Right.
just mean like, I don't know how to say this. It's not like cock worship, but it's kind of like, but it's like having respect for it, for
Right.
that
But there's
that
some kind of circuit there where it's like here
yeah,
is the base and this is where it comes through.
like that natural proclivity towards sex and touch and procreation and like regeneration, or I don't know, some like I don't quite know how to explain what I'm saying,
Right.
but
Like
I think if you have
there's a lot of natural processes and like reflections of like natural things in men, and these are
right.
just like, in the map of things, these are just some of the things that align with some of those ideas. Yeah.
But I guess what I'll say is this way. Like, I do think that men generally are more like externally oriented, like more, physically, externally wired. So their inclination is to try to have sex like first in relationship, or want to have that need met. And for women, truly, like, I think, I don't want to say like stereotypically, but yes, I mean, like, women are the ones who like romantic movies and stuff, and like want to feel loved and safe and emotionally secure
Hmm.
before being receptive here. So it's like we are literally flipped.
Right.
Like it's polarized, and it's like
Which is why I go on dates and I do handstands. You see, it's much easier.
it's funny. That's a good joke. But I think it's like learning to meet in the middle, because I do think there needs to be some exchange of like emotional safety, and for holding like that kind of vulnerability
Right.
as you like traverse that distance
Hmm.
of these different like inclinations or drives.
Right.
And
Well,
so, like,
I
not
think.
to say that you can't have a healthy relationship that begins with a one night stand, like I think you can, but I just think it's about being in tune with like what you really need, and not
Hmm.
trying to push past like your own need for pacing or safety, or to really feel seen first, just to try to get another person, or to make them happy, or just
Right.
to have your own needs met.
Alison Armstrong, what does she call women who think men are women? What's that? What does she say?
Oh, she says, I love her. She has so many great things, but she says, well, she will call women frog farmers.
Okay.
Well, she said she got that from, I think it's in her book, The Queen's Code.
Right.
It was called. It's really good. But she said she had heard that term from like this professor or something, and it's basically women who take princes and turn them into frogs. So when you meet men, it's like she says men are always reacting to women, and if you think about it, like the
Hmm.
way that I view like how the universe, or how manifestation works, or there's even a dating coach that I like a lot. His name is Adam Gilad, and he says that men are Pavlov's gender. And so it's like in movies and things, like people have a crude way of saying like, oh, men are trainable, but it's not necessarily like that. I mean, it sort of is and it sort of isn't. Like men are biologically wired to please women in a way. It is part
Mm-hmm.
of a biological imperative, because without that, it's like you don't have the orgasm, you don't have like a lot of things that need to happen for procreation,
Right.
right? So there is like something there. But the way that I see it is like men really need appreciation. They need appreciation and admiration and like respect. And so um for a lot of women, like they'll start out dating and men, are going to knock themselves out to try to like make the woman happy. But if they're never getting any appreciation, she's only complaining and talking about what she doesn't want. That is not in any way telling the partner like what she does want.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And men aren't mind, like nobody's a mind reader, no
Right.
matter what your gender is.
Right.
But like truly, if you're happy and you're pleased by life, and there isn't this huge burden on the masculine energy partner to please you, then it's like everything that partner does is like icing on the cake, and then you're full of appreciation, which
Mm-hmm.
feeds his energy,
Right.
which is like, oh, I'm doing it right, I'm winning, like I'm doing the thing,
Sure.
right? And I feel like the universe is that way too. And it's like, I see manifestation working that way, as knowing what to focus on is finding that place of inner satisfaction so that you start to appreciate. And when you're in the energy of appreciation, you are an open channel to receive. So Alison Armstrong talks about these women being frog farmers and
No, it
like,
was hairy monkeys or something.
oh, well, yeah. So, so the saying is that women will often think that men are just hairy, misbehaving women,
Right.
but men and women are very different, like
Right.
biologically, physically, hormonally,
So
even the
say it
brain
again.
structure.
Women all sometimes often
So
think
it
that.
is. So sometimes women, like you and I were talking about this the other day, how like men can perceive women as just being like soft, what does she say? It's something funny. It's just like soft illogical men, or like hairless soft illogical men,
Okay.
right? Something like that.
And
And that
conversely, right?
conversely, women seeing men as just hairy misbehaving women.
Okay.
So it's like trying to hold the opposite gender or opposite um energy partner
Yeah. Energy.
as
This is.
something else,
Yeah.
because it's like the reason why you're attracted to that person is because you're energetic complements.
Right.
Like most people aren't, even if you're attracted to the same gender or same like external features, likely you're not going to be attracted to someone who has all the exact same like
Right.
energetic components that you do. It's going to be a compliment.
Well, part of the zeitgeist right now, I think, is in denial of how actually important and how different, right, the energies of masculine and feminine are, and about how people are
Right.
identified with, right?
Right. So you reminded me of this podcast that I heard. It was Aubrey Marcus, and I don't remember the woman. I think she's a doctor, and I want to look it up. But she was saying that, and I love this so much. Like she was telling a story about how she was in one of her friend's offices. It was a doctor. And suddenly, like she was sitting in this chair, and suddenly she was like, she just noticed she was super, super horny. And she was like, I just wanted to fuck everyone. I wanted to fuck the men. I wanted to fuck the women that I saw coming in the office. And she was like, what is going on with me? Like, this is so crazy. Like, I am crazy, crazy horny. She realized she had leaned her arm in testosterone cream and had like absorbed like a bunch of it. And when she realized that, she was like, oh my God. And she just had this realization. And she said that she thinks that every woman should experience what it's like to have like the normal masculine dose of testosterone running through their body at
Right.
least once. And she said, I feel like every man should go into a gay club and have all of that like sexual pressure and intensity like directed right at him.
Right.
So it's like understanding what it's like to be
Right.
on both sides of that
Yeah,
like
and
polarity.
these bases, right, are so deep, fundamentally deep in our beings, where it's just like it's wild to me. It's not wild to me because I think that's the way I was raised too. You know, it's like this is like a very like David Data stage 2 thing. It's like I'm okay, are you okay? Like I'm this and you're that too, right? Like we're all the same, and it's like no, like it's not that neutral. Like in our beings, the things that we actually places we actually come from, especially when we are collapsed, right? So one of the stories David Data tells, and I told you this the other day, but I just think it like underlines the point. So he was talking about men, and he's like, men, when you're in a fight with your woman, right? It does you a disservice to think about her even as a human being. Because when you imagine a human being, you imagine yourself, right? And when
Mm-hmm.
you are like collapsed, like in a fight, like some giant fight, you couldn't be any more different, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, like when we're engaging like all our things and like in some creative spot, sure, you can flow in and out and be all sorts of things, but when you're collapsed in, and I know like that like rocked my world and made a ton of sense to me because I had been there so many times in like relationship fights where I'm like, okay, fuck, okay, and it's like you said this and then I did that and then I said this and then you did that. That's what happened. And whatever you're like bullshit you're on now, like that's fucking nuts. And I cannot deal with
Right.
this, whatever this
So
is. And like what she is in her. Just it's just there is like not.
it's
it,
completely subjective.
it's
It's no
completely
longer objective.
subjective. You know
It's
that
just how
like
she feels. It
it's
doesn't,
just how she feels, right?
there's no facts necessarily, but
Right.
it's funny because like this is what I coaching my male clients on a lot to talk about. I think we talked about this in another podcast, but it was kind of like how when you have well, and this can also happen in like an internal collapse. So there's something I wrote, like a quote. It's like if he tries to think her, he'll fail to feel her.
Hmm.
Because she's on the level of emotions, he's on the level of thought or consciousness.
Right.
But then, of course, he'll have his own masculine, feminine stuff going on. She'll have her
Yeah.
own whatever. So we can, based on what our own internal masculine and feminine energy is doing and what we have modeled from our parents, is likely going to represent this like internal relationship landscape.
Sure.
Um, but when there's an argument, it's like the feminine energy partner is going to go strictly to how she's feeling in the moment, and
Right.
her perspective is going to reflect those feelings.
Right.
So even though her perspective is going to be flawed or incorrect because her emotions are just all going, and like our perception perspective always follows state, how we're like what we're
Right.
feeling, right? And what the man is going to do, or the masculine energy partner is going to rely on, yes, like you said, the thoughts, like this doesn't make sense, like it's going to go to that logical side
Right.
of like, this is how we fix this problem, there is a
Yeah.
problem here, we're going to fix
Right.
it. And she's like, I don't want to be fixed right now. She's
Right.
like, I want to be witnessed now. And he's
Right.
like, I want to fix this right now. And so it takes surrender, I think, on both parts for the feminine to not repress her feelings or shame herself, or let the masculine partner shame her either, but just to
Mm.
be open to have space held for her and to be witnessed like in her vulnerability. It's
Right.
like in that moment, like nothing needs to be done.
Right.
It's like if it's too hot and you're just like going at it like this, it's like you need to go, like figure
Mm-hmm.
your stuff out. But if you're able to come together, it's a lot less about doing and more about being together and
Mm-hmm.
just holding space for her feelings. So it's almost like an internal storm.
Right.
So once she knows that she's like seen and heard in this place, and it's like, it's so important that she has her emotional state validated and acknowledged, like above all. It makes complete sense that you would feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
It makes so much sense that you might think that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. Anyone in your shoes would probably think that. So yes, anyone that's her will, based on her life experience. You may not, but you can at least say that, even if it's not correct, because
Yeah.
we're not really comparing apples to apples here. It's logic, and then it's perspective seated in all this emotional turmoil, likely
Chaos.
not even rooted to the current moment. It's like
Right.
all the moments, it's hormones, it's a bunch of things
Right.
happening at once,
It's the
right? So it's just
trauma.
a
Yeah.
lot of chaos and just feeling, feeling, feeling,
Mm-hmm.
feeling. If you want to fan the flames and cause an explosion, tell her her feelings are wrong or she's stupid, or, try
Right.
to give her insight or advice in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then you'll really, or deny her emotions or tell her to calm down.
Right.
Like, if you want to cause a bigger upset, like, do
Uh-huh.
that, like, negate her feelings.
Right.
But basically, when you hold space for those emotions and like validate, in some ways, like, yes, it makes sense. You might think that, or it makes sense, blah, 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 even if it's not correct. She'll like settle into that, like being witness, that space of just like, oh, he sees me, like he gets it, like he's tracking with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that place, it can be like, then you can perhaps start to like offer some consciousness, or you could even invite her into it. You could say,
Right.
hey, are you interested in, are you willing to? But it's almost like being there and noticing the shift for her to relax and then open.
Right.
Because in that state of having this like tight constriction, like she's not gonna be able to hear you from that place.
Right. That, and from like the masculine perspective, it's like there's a whole internal relationship with big feminine energy, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
how you
Yeah.
deal
Okay.
with your
So,
own feminine
yeah. So
energy.
forever and still some, it's like big feminine energy equals destruction, right? So I had a whole host of tools, to like deal with it, right? And it was a problem, right? So in relationships, it's just like, it's honestly, it's a lot of disassociation that happens right away. I just like go off into my brain. It's like, oh, fuck this. Oh my God, fuck. It's like not being with, right? Which kind of, in a little bit of a way, it models the sexual energy too, because like sexual energy will just like sit there and boil and be very fuzzy and just like essentially uncomfortable, and like, the
Mhm.
always go-to thing was like, get this monkey off my back, get this monkey off my back, just like, let's just get this shit out of here. But what you can begin to do is you can start to understand that, like, even though it's very prickly and feels like it's way bigger than us, because energetically it is way bigger, you can start to develop a deep trust in your own, like, not being able to actually be touched by anything, right? Your
Mhm.
own like still flame inside you that doesn't matter how hard this wind blows. Doesn't matter how big this crazy monster gets. It's just like to still like remain in the flame, remain in the storm, and just like be a witness, like on the high seas, right? you know
Well, also, I think there may be a helpful reframing in that however big her ocean is, like your shores she can never outrun your shores,
right.
right? Because you can always expand to like hold more.
Yeah.
And so instead of seeing or tapping into those metaphors where you feel smaller or helpless and this thing is bigger than you,
Sure.
reframe like, yes, we have like our bodies and but it's kind of like,
Yeah, you're right there. There's some magic in the
reframe.
words that you choose to get creative with, right?
Right. And then, obviously all this is going to be easier when you're like in that place of having that consciousness or awareness. You're going to be able to tap into like the 8 C's of internal family systems that like Dr. Richard Schwartz talks about, like compassion, being compassionate, confident, curious, connected, courageous, creative, having a sense of clarity and calm.
Mm.
I don't know
Yeah,
if
and I
that's
think that, like, especially in relationship, it will reflect your own internal relationships, as to how you can actually deal with conflict and discord outside of yourself, because
mm-hmm.
if it's very if it's fraught with lots of insecurities, right, and like bonding issues and lots of traumas, because traumas introduce triggers and all sorts of safety mechanisms inside of your own being, well then out here in two people land, a lot of those same kind of mechanisms are going to get kicked up.
Right. Something I was just thinking of is like how important it is to go within when you're in a place of like rupture or having a trigger, because um something that I've seen is like there will be it can be a masculine energy, like masculine or feminine person, but it's basically like when you're in that emotional place, it's really important to know what you need and to be able to ask for what kind of support you need.
Mm,
But I think conversely, in a partnership, it's important to try to remember to ask what a person needs as well
sure.
in that space, because sometimes you may have a person who's like asking for support or being fixed, but then it's like they're not in the space to receive that.
Sure. Yeah.
So they might make the assumption that what they really want is a solution or answer, but they haven't even been in that space to witness, to use their own masculine energy consciousness to witness themselves
Yeah.
long enough to just have any space held for the emotions generated.
Right.
So then it's like skipping a step, and
Yeah.
then you could have a person that's like asking for like wanting the answer, but it's like they're not really there yet. And then, you may have experienced this too. Probably a lot of people have, but giving or offering like unsolicited advice. Like even
Yeah.
if you ask someone if they want to hear your opinion or your advice, if they're not in the space to be open and receptive to
Mm-hmm.
it, um, then they're very closed off and constricted, and then it
Yeah.
just
I love
feels
to
like
do that.
they're being attacked. Yeah. Well, I feel like men have a knack for that sometimes because they're
Sure.
very fix it oriented. Like
Right.
their brains go
Well,
right
it's like
into the
it gets tricky for me when it feels like it's very like low fruit, like it's like this is a really easy problem. You should just solve this really easy problem. I know I've done this with you plenty of times, and you're just like, don't ever fucking tell me what to do, and it's just like, whoa.
I don't think I say don't ever fucking tell me what to do.
I mean, energetically.
I say I didn't ask, but when I do want to know, I'll ask you. Okay, maybe it's the same tone.
Like I've slipped into that mode plenty of times, right? Because that's just, which is part of like back to the triangle
Right, the
thing of
fixer.
the
Yeah.
victim. There's like the fixer,
Oh
and
yeah.
just
Oh,
like, oh, just
I'm
let me do,
heavily identified with like the fixer part,
yeah,
and it's like checking in with yourself, like, where am I
right.
at when I'm offering
But if you
this?
start to pay attention through attunement to energy, you start to
Mhm.
see how this like cycle works. It's like, well, and depending where you are, like you can start to feel, especially over timeline, like it'll be kind of like locked up, the energy kind of dips down, and then there'll be like a okay, and like it kind of chills
Right. Yeah.
off a
There's
little
like a
bit,
release
and
or
like a
a
little bit of
sigh.
levity, and then like maybe you can talk critically about the thing that happened, and then you could offer something without judgment or shame about the way that you saw something, or like an ideal that you want to shoot for.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So it's more so like there just needs to be a crack or an opening for consciousness to get into,
Right.
to like expand, but
Right.
which that sounds like a really sexual metaphor, but it's true though. It's true though. Like
Sure. Yeah.
for every person, like if you're in a triggered moment and your emotions, like you're contracted, your body's contracted around this, it's like in order for consciousness to get in there, you actually kind of have to be like, oh, I'm aware, I'm in pain, okay, let me seek help, like let me ask,
Hmm.
let me open up and like look
Yeah.
up,
Right.
basically.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'll just battle forever.
Yeah, you'll just be like, ow, this is causing me pain, and try to shut everything out and blame everyone else, and not really, you know, yeah, you won't have the inner harmony needed to create outer harmony.
Bitchin'.
Did we cover? Yeah,
I
probably.
mean, whatever. We riffed.
Well, there's a lot of different things to like cover, but
So Alison Armstrong, name a book.
yeah, I would say The Queen's Code is a
Okay.
really great book.
David Data, tons of lectures online, but also it's the way of the masculine man or something like that. Whatever.
Yeah, I am a really big fan of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, because
Yeah.
Dr. John Gray gets
Right.
into like
Yeah. No, that's
some
good.
polarity
I like that one
stuff,
too.
like natural, just like hormonal, just different. Like I think his work is really important.
The one I read lately was the Kabbalion, and that's a Hermetic thing. And it was like the last one was the law of masculine, feminine principles. I don't know. I'm not saying the name right, but that was good.
Oh yeah, and then we also spoke about Richard Moore, and that's King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and then I forget the author of Women Who Run with Wolves, but those are masculine and feminine archetype books.
Who wrote the? I don't think it's Richard Moore.
Who wrote
Anyway.
what?
Who wrote the Internal Family Systems one?
Oh, Richard Schwartz, Dr. Richard
Schwartz.
Schwartz. Yeah, like his latest book is called No Bad Parts, and that's really good for parts work.
It's Robert Moore, but it's
Robert.
Yeah, Douglas Gillette and Robert.
What did
Moore.
I say? Oh, I said Richard Moore.
Yeah.
So it's Robert Moore. Yeah, you're
Robert
right.
Moore.
It is Robert Moore. Thanks. Who else? There's someone else who was giving a lot of lectures in LA, and I cannot remember her name. Dr. But I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about this stuff. It's like endlessly fascinating.
I just like the idea of applying it in different places. Obviously it's like in relation.
Also, like I think one of the most fascinating things I had read, and this is also Alison Armstrong, but it's called, I love her company. I love her educational materials and her stuff, but it's called The Amazing Development of Men.
Yeah, that was a good.
And I think it's really amazing
good.
Because it helps to kind of talk about the life cycle and trajectory of men through their growth and their evolution. And I think it also pertains to women as they move through their own purpose and passion. Like it'll refer to their masculine energy.
Right.
And she does a lot of really fantastic work.
I like Robert Bly. Iron John was a good one.
I never read that one. I've read some of David Data's books. I find his work very interesting.
What did you read? Blue? What's that blue one?
I think I read Dear Lover, or like The Way of the Superior Man. Yeah. But there's a lot of different authors and books and things, but it's a really, really fascinating topic.
I think it's a cool topic. I also just like how it's like applicable in so many different types of ways,
Yeah.
like internally and externally. It just seems like this is a, sort of like a partial manual for the construct of like reality, about how.
Right, because at its basis, like it's really getting into polarity.
Right.
It's really explaining like I think the totality of our existence, which is the marriage of masculine and feminine.
Yeah, which is like, growing up, it's like nobody talked to me about that kind of shit, and it's like, what? Why not? This is like everywhere. Right. It exists in all these places. It's helpful to think about these ways, It makes sense when I'm fighting with my girlfriend. And like, oh, we're different. Oh my God. Big time.
Yeah.
Anyway, come say hi to us on our socials. Leave a comment. Give us a review. Do anything. We like that kind of stuff. We have an Instagram page, which is the So Emotional Podcast. Come say hi. Give us a follow. And that's that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Thanks for listening.
All right. So Emotional. Audi 5000. Bye.